For the most part, I think I have one here left to do. But we need to go and choose now what parts we're gonna unwrap together. And another important reason for why we need to do this is when we go into Substance Painter and we actually go and bake our mesh maps, then especially for something like the ambient occlusion, very often you can't exactly bake stuff that are close together. So, for example, if I go and put all of these things in the same group, and I join them all together to bake it, it's gonna not really bake it in the correct way. And so we need to basically go and select parts that are quite far apart like this. And so they won't really have any effect on the baking process. Okay, so with that then being said, I'm going to unhide my reference images here, and I just want to kind of go through and take a look at more or less everything that is the same color. I'm also going to take tiny bits and bobs and unwrap them separately, like the bolts and stuff like that. Now, another thing that is extremely important to remember is that instancing and mirror is going to be your friend, especially when it comes to um, you know, having objects that are similar and the way that they are presented on your UV islands. Because if you have things like these, especially if you're not going to make each and every one of them unique, then having them crossed over with each other saves island space and just makes the whole process a bit easier. Okay, now I definitely did not unwrap this perfectly or anything like that, but it should be able to get the point across. So I'm going to jump over to my UV editing tab over here, and I just want to go and take a look at everything that's more or less going to be the same color. And for the most part, it's going to be the handles, this part here in the back, I want purple as well. And then maybe we can even do the barrel on the same space and perhaps those linkages there as well. So then I'll jump into edit mode. And as you can see, these three barrels in the front are an instance. That still has the mirror that I'm going to have to apply, but I'm going to do that after I unwrapped. And then these are normally duplicated. And then that's just obviously something with a mirror. I think it does a mirror. Not sure. So I'll just unwrap those together. And one thing that I usually like to do, especially when it comes to like adding a bunch of things on the same UV island, would be to go over here at the top and say UV and then average UV, average island scale, and then pack islands. So that just makes everything a little bit more neat. There's some parts that I want to play around with though. One trick that I learned from Blender that's quite useful is if you take these and you say scale x0, you take that line scale x0. Okay, that might throw us off a bit. So let's take those two, scale y. You should be able to right click and say follow active quads, and that will then make this whole thing straight. Now, it's also very important to know that if I were to go and unwrap this again, so press U to unwrap, it's going to reset my changes that I made on the UV islands. So just be careful for that as well. Okay, this part here can be much smaller. It's not really that detailed. It's this part that I want to just quickly increase the scale of. I'm trying not to take too much of your time with this because obviously we need to focus on substance. Okay, so I can either decide whether I want to quickly go through and apply um, the modifiers on this. That one has a bevel. This one has subdiv. We can remove that. Subdiv. We can remove that. This one has a mirror. Let's apply. And then these, I quite prefer them to be blocky like that. Okay. Gonna select everything, select this one here and say Control J. So just to double check everything is still on the same layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove my material here, make a new material that I'm going to Shift A, Alt H. Okay, so it's always good to go by color association. So for this one, I'm just going to call that purple paint and I can hide that. Then I can focus on the gold pieces, which is going to be those two over there, these ones over here, crosshair, this one in the front, and this whole piece. Also, probably these ones. So I'll select all of that and just quickly unwrap it. That looks good for the most part. So all of this is still on the same island. So I can bring that back and just quickly rename that to gold. Hide that. Ah, that one's gold as well. We'll put that in now. Got to add those two. Sorry about that. Then this and this. And then I think we only have the tiny stuff left. This one didn't mirror now. And these are the only ones that are left. So just to double check, this one has a bevel, that one has a mirror and a bevel. Should be everything. It's not just this part that I screwed up. So luckily we can just go to mesh and symmetrize that. I want to symmetrize it that way. Okay, no, wait. Go. Okay, so everything should be set up now. That over there is the metal parts. These are the purple paint parts. Those are the golden parts. And then there I have my bolts and stuff. So I can unhide all of this. And remember that when you export something, it's more than likely going to apply your modifiers. So it's important to maybe have a low poly and a high poly version. In this case, I am only going to have my low poly version, which doesn't have any subdivs or anything, as you can see. But it's quite useful to have a high poly version as well, especially when you're making characters and things like that. Okay, but with that then being said, I'm going to select everything over here, and I'll just quickly save. I'll go to export, and I'm going to export this as an FBX. I'll just export it to my desktop. And when you're exporting a low poly and a high poly, you have to say underscore low and underscore high for the corresponding meshes, obviously, because with Substance, it uses those tag names and it picks up on that, and then the baking works correct. Okay, now I just want to limit this to selected objects only. And then I usually go to my geometry and change the normals only to face. You can see there that apply modifiers is on, and luckily it's just a bevel all around my object, so I'm not too worried about that. The rest of the stuff should all be good, so you don't have to really worry about that. So I'm going to export the FBX.
Sorry, Theunis.
Yeah.
Are you streaming just the Blender window?
Yeah, for now, but I can quickly swap over because I need to. I just exported it now.
All right, because the pop-up menu didn't show in the stream.
Oh, goodness. Okay, cool. No problem. I'll quickly swap it over. Okay, there we go. Should be better now.
I believe it should show up now. Yes.
Okay. So if you're faced with this, just ignore it like we ignore all issues. And just click on continue anyway. That will luckily swap over to just opening up the software, supposedly. There we go. Okay, now when you open it up for the first time, usually you're faced with a loading screen. I think I disabled mine. So if you get that loading screen, you can just close it down and your Substance Painter will look like this. Now, the same as any other Adobe software, your panels and your windows on the side is extremely customizable. But the main thing that I just want to mention is that you need to take a look at the asset browser. Used to be called the shelf. Um, this is where you're going to find all of your materials and your smart materials, your masks and all those type of things. And I'll go through them in a little bit. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is obviously import our um, file. So I'm going to go to File, New. Over there, I usually keep it on a PBR metallic roughness alpha blend. And then I can just go ahead and select the file, which is then obviously my low poly. The great thing is we can choose the resolution of our textures beforehand, but we can change it throughout the course of the process at any point in time, at least. And for the rest of the stuff, I leave it as is usually. I've played around with their auto unwrapping, and it doesn't always really work out all that well unless your object is quite simple. So I would recommend doing your unwrapping inside of Blender itself. Okay. Then another thing I need to mention is if you have your normal maps and stuff like that that you baked inside a Blender already, you can add that over here. So if you have any sort of maps, your ambient occlusion or your normal maps or whatever you've baked, you can add that in here. But I'm going to be baking mine in the software itself. So I'll just go ahead and click on OK. And this is usually where I hold my thumbs because if it doesn't import, then you know you did some unwrapping thing wrong. Okay, so as you can see over here on the right-hand side, we can see our texture set list. And this is based now on the materials that we made inside a Blender. You can see there's my purple paint, there's my metal, there's my gold, and there's my bolts. And I can hide and unhide any of these, and that will then hide that part of the mesh. Then I have my layers here at the bottom that works exactly the same way as with Photoshop. So obviously whatever's on top is going to be displayed first. And you can also change your blending modes over here. So you can see there's color dodge and any sort of the other blending modes you can find in Photoshop. And then this slider over here is your opacity. Okay, now we get a different types of things we can add, and we can also edit different types of maps. So let's say, for example, I threw a purple paint on this. I can go and change the base color of it, or the blending mode of the base color, the blending mode of the normal map, or the opacity of each one of these maps individually, which is quite great. Okay, but before we get to that, let me just quickly go over the general navigation and then I'll jump to the texture set settings, which is where we're going to be baking our maps. So to move around your object, you're going to hold in Alt and middle mouse button and that will pan around your object. If you hold Alt and you left click, that's going to rotate around your object, and Alt right click is going to zoom in and out of your um, view. But obviously, middle mouse button or middle mouse scroll is going to do that as well. Only difference being that alt right click zooms into your last location, whereas if you scroll here, it's going to zoom towards where your mouse is located. So I usually use that one, works the best. Okay, so it's fairly simple, very similar to Blender, except for we're using Alt and then middle mouse and left click and right click. Okay, so you can find your texture set settings over here, which is where we want to go to bake our maps. And if I scroll down, you can see over there, this is the general channels that I can find underneath this specific material. So let's say, for example, I wanted to go and add something like emissive and opacity because it's not there. And these channels also fall underneath your painting modes over here that I will get to in a moment. So if you add a channel, it will give you another functionality here. So just to demonstrate that, I'm going to click on my channels over here, and I can go to emissive, or you can go to user channels if you've set up some. You can go to unsupported by shader, but usually they have what you need right there. So now that I added my emission over here, you'll see that emission appeared over here. Okay, but we'll get to this segment in a moment. So with my current material selected, I can scroll down and click on Bake Mesh Maps. And this will open up my window over here. First setting I want to change is the output. And for now, I am usually just going to test it on a 2K map before I export it finally. Then I'll bake it as a 4K perhaps. Now you'll see that some of them have these warning signs next to it, and that basically just means that it needs to use a high poly mesh to get the results that you need for the bakes. However, Substance Painter has this really cool button over here that says use low poly mesh as a high poly mesh. So that means you just have to use your imported model. You don't have to worry about anything else. If you do have a high poly mesh, you can just click on that button and find it over there. Then usually the settings is fine. For the most part, you'll maybe want to change your max frontal and your max rear distance to 0.005. But other than that, you don't really need to do anything. And then your anti-aliasing is also quite important because it bakes like pixels on your maps if you don't set it up to something quite high. So just keep that in mind. Okay, but that's everything more or less. So you can now either only bake the maps of the bolts and then the rest as you go along, or you can just click over here and say bake selected maps, and that will run through your whole model and bake all of the maps. So you'll see some changes appearing on since we have some time to waste. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
No, just watching, learning.
Cool. Are there some of you who have used the software before?
Yet no. Oh, not yet. No.
Okay, cool. It's an amazing 3D painting software.
With
I live and breathe for Substance basically. When it comes to digital painting, especially on 3D assets, for me the best. I don't think I've seen anything else that really comes close.
I have to say, with the UI and the layout, it makes me think of Photoshop, but in 3D.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. And I guess that came along when Adobe bought them. And to be honest, I was quite scared when Adobe bought them because we all know Adobe is such a lovely platform. But they've been pulling their socks up. Like I haven't really ran into any issues with Substance at all, so I'm happy. Um,
Yeah, the biggest stopping block for me always was trying to learn this software was always the price tag. So
yeah.
that was the big thing for me, and the big thing now is also is like after our studies, I don't think a lot of us are going to have the money to immediately have this software again. So
Mhm.
it's always the stopping block for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I
Um,
get you.
yeah,
Well, look, I mean, I know that you can buy a perpetual license, I think, on Steam. It's not too
yes.
expensive. So that's not a bad option for someone starting out, just getting out of college and still wanting the software and wanting to be able to use it.
Uh, Steam Break it has it's 800 on Steam, but actually got mine for 600 on special.
Oh, nice. That's really cool. Yeah, I know they every now and then throw out some specials, but I'm really happy that it got included into the whole Adobe package for you guys now, because it's going to definitely help when it comes to texturing. Another thing I wanted to mention while the maps are baking is there's some really interesting maps that it's busy baking that's going to help us a great amount when it comes to texturing surface details. And we all know by now that when it comes to texturing, it's your imperfections and your surface details that really sell the story of your asset, and it sells the idea behind what it went through, and who owns it. Is it full of stickers? Is it full of scratches? Is it kept neat and golden? You need to take all of those things into consideration, and with some of these maps it makes it really easy to go and place surface imperfections like that. For example, obviously we all know a normal map and a ambient occlusion map, but like the curvature map, for example, is going to go and measure all of the angles, the sharp angles. And when you apply a smart mask, which is something we're going to be speaking about in a second or two, it's actually going to automatically apply some scratches on the curvature of the model, which is really cool. Okay, so I just clicked OK over there, and we can see that we have some issues with regards to the maps because everything is supposed to be a single color, and it's usually the um, ambient occlusion that's causing the problem. Now, obviously, we don't exactly want to go and remove the ambient occlusion from those assets, but it's more often than not, it's the only fix. Now you can see that when I remove or unhide um, my layers, you'll see the ambient occlusion that baked onto the other meshes or the other maps as well. And that's why I generally like to bake my map separately. I just feel like it works out a little bit better usually. But yeah, anyway, so I'm just going to remove the ambient occlusion from that. Besides, I like putting ambient occlusion in Blender as well. More often than not, I prefer using Blender's ambient occlusion. So I'll just go through and remove ambient occlusion from all of these. But for the rest of them, we can leave them as is. And you can see now that the rest of my mesh is all the same color, which is great. So we can, like I mentioned before, once we're close to done, we can just go and bake the normals again, and then all of the maps again on 4K perhaps, and then it should look a little bit better as well. Anyways, you'll see that these don't really do anything except throw you into a later part of the menu, so I don't really pay attention to those. So we can jump back to our layers. Now, when it comes to our layers, there's a bunch of different things that we can go and apply. And more often than not, it's a good thing to go and apply some base colors or some fill layers to differentiate between the parts of your mesh that you want certain colors. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the layer setup works the same as in Photoshop. And then this right here is where you get all of your paint properties. So you'll see this is going to be what your stroke is going to look like. And I can click and drag on here to test it out, which is quite fun. I don't even have my graphics tablet connected now, so I'm not going to get the best pen sensitivity, but this will give you a good idea of what it's going to look like. And then there you see a preview of your color. Now, if you go to the size, obviously that's going to adjust the thickness of your brush. If you go to minimum size, I think that goes to the taper at the bottom. Your flow is going to be almost like the opacity of your brush. And you'll see anything that has this little icon next to it is going to be pen pressure. If you hover over that, it'll just tell you that it's for pen pressure. Then we get stroke opacity, which does something very similar to flow. With flow, it just doesn't make the ink come out of your pen as quickly, if I can say it that way. And then with spacing, we can go and space out each brush stroke or each brush shape so that it makes a wider open stroke like that. So it's going to be dotted then, which is also pretty useful, especially when you want to add some random jitter to that and it creates like a completely different brush than what you have selected. But we have some really cool brushes that I'll go through in a second. Okay, so I'm just going to take my spacing back to 5. Then over here, if you have one of those pen displays, usually the rotation of your pen is going to affect this, but you can also turn the rotation of your pen over here. So when you get a brush that's perhaps a smear or something, you can go and rotate it over there just to get a different angle. Then for the size jitter, it just adds some randomness to your size. This one's going to add randomness to your flow, or jitter as they call it inside of Substance. This one's going to do angle jitter, and this one is position jitter. And that's what I was speaking about earlier, where if you want like a really nice spray paint type of effect, then you can do something like this. Okay, but I'm going to bring that back. Okay, things here, I don't really ever change them, so you don't have to worry about that. Then we can change the alpha of our brush, which is then technically going to change the shape of our brush. So you'll see later when we go to our brushes over there, well, when we go to our brushes over there, you'll see that all of these are technically alphas. And if you want to go and create your own brush in Photoshop, it's very easy to just quickly create a small black square and then paint um, on your black square in white and then import that into Substance. And it will then come across as a brush as well, or as an alpha, whatever you designate it at. But I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. Okay, so as you can see here, we have a bunch of different brushes. These ones over here that have the orange dots means that it's a dynamic stroke. So it adapts as you paint, which is pretty cool. These used to be particle brushes, so I'm not sure why they're in here now. And then you'll see that it also pulls through some Photoshop brushes, which is really cool, especially if you want to go for a hand-painted look. Some of these Photoshop brushes work really, really nice, especially Kyle's brushes. Okay, so there's a huge amount of brushes over here for us to work with, and you can see that quite a lot of them are dynamic in some way. So for example, this one is going to give you like a dirty ink look, where this one is dynamic in the sense of it's going to change its hue as you keep painting with it. So there's some pretty interesting stuff to play around with over here. And now let's say, for example, that I want to choose a different brush. I can just go up to, let's say, for example, dirt, and I can click on dirt and it'll immediately replace my alpha with that alpha over there, and I can then paint. Now you'll see that it also changed the icon in my 3D window, which is very useful because then you can see exactly how big the shape is going to be and where you're going to be splattering dirt or dust or whatever. And remember, it's the layering of your materials that make your item special. Then we get hardness and shape, which is just going to basically adjust the contrast of it. It's almost like a color ramp inside a blender. So that's going to bring up your black values, and this one will bring up your white. So it's also quite useful to play around with, and you can invert it if you want to. The really cool thing is that you can choose any of these alphas for your eraser as well, which is great. So if you have a sticker and you want to erase some grime from it, you can just do that as well. I'll demonstrate that in a bit. Okay, then we getting to the stencils over here. So I'll go over a stencil in a little bit. It's basically using an alpha to carve or print something onto your object. It's exactly what it says. It's just going to stencil it down and you can paint over it. And then here is the important part that I wanted to speak about. At first, you can see that we have our selection. And if you click on something, it's going to remove it from the selection over here, which is quite cool because if I just want to go and paint the color on this layer, for example, I can just choose the color and paint the color, and it's not going to change anything else that was underneath that layer. But for now, let's just go and switch all of these on except for opacity and emission. Then material mode. This is usually if you want to go and apply a material like this to your brush. If you click on that, you'll see that it automatically changes your base color, your roughness, and your metallic for you. Now you can only choose your material from a material like this. if you go to Smart Mask and you click on it, it's not going to change the material color or any of the properties, because a Smart Mask is a folder or a group that you need to drag onto your object. So we'll get to that in a moment. So you'll see now when I start painting, it's going to very nicely paint in that pattern, and the white underneath is going to be the nothingness that is here. There's also a mirror over here at the top. So if you click that, that's an x-axis mirror. You can go and change the mirror. You can make it radial symmetry. So there's really a lot we can do over here. So let's say, for example, that I now want to go and change the color of my my gold so that it's not gold anymore. The really cool thing about Substance Painter is the fact that I can go and view or color pick any sort of color from an exterior program as well. So let's say, for example, I go in here and I take a look at my references and I hide my objects. I want to paint that purple over there. I can click and hold this down and it'll transfer over to my Blender, which helps a lot. And then it just brings that there so you can adjust the values, and when you're happy, you can close it down. So now my paint will be that purple. Okay, but obviously we don't want it to be that rough because you can see over here that it's not that shiny. So I'm going to go to my roughness and bring it a little bit down. But as you can see, it's not adjusting my roughness over here. It's only going to adjust my brushes from now on. And that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind when you're doing painting inside a substance. Changing this is not going to change what you already have. It's just changing your brush. Okay, so I'm more or less happy with that roughness. The metallic I want to leave on 1. If you take it to 0, it will give you that effect. Okay, and then I disabled the others. If you want, you can go and add a normal map, for example. Let's say I want to add some dirt here. Then I can add a normal map and a height over there. And I can go to my height, and taking it into the positive is going to make you make the mesh stand out. And if you take it into the negative, it's going to dip in that mesh. So I just want to paint some dirt or some dust over here. That means my roughness needs to be very, very rough like that, and the metallic needs to be 0. And you'll see now that if I do this, okay, it seems like it's flipped around, so my bad on that. The height, if you take it into the positive, it dips in. If you take it into the negative, then it brings it out. I guess it varies sometimes, because I've definitely had it before where the positive pushes it out. In fact, that's what I'm used to. Anyway, so now you can see how it's starting to layer the dirt. And the cool thing is, if we go to our base color here and we drag that opacity down to 0, you can really see how the normal is pushing out over here. And that's the cool thing about Substance, is we can edit the opacity of each one of our layers without really having to worry about affecting the rest. So you know that my purple was shiny underneath this, and we just went and dropped our our base color to 0, but the reflection is still there. If I wanted to get rid of that, I can go to roughness and drop it down over here. Okay, same goes for the normal and the height. If I go to the height, I can just go and drop it down, and it doesn't make such a big difference. So we'll just maybe make it like that. So you get some small details over there. Okay, anyways, I want to go back to my base color. I'm going to delete this, and I want to start over with my textures. So at first, I want to create a fill layer, and you'll see that you do that by clicking this button over here. Once you've done that, you can go and change the color of your fill layer, as well as the roughness and all that type of stuff. So I'm going to go and just select maybe around here. Height can stay as is. The roughness can come up a little bit. Metallic must go up. Acetylene emission is none. Okay. So I've filled this up now, which means that I can start by adding my surface imperfections. But before we get to that, I just quickly want to go and showcase to you what a smart material is. Now, some of these materials, before we get into smart materials, have some really, really cool settings. So for example, if I take this one, I can click and drag it to my object, and that will then automatically apply it to that whole object. So let's say, for example, I drag that one over there. Okay, it's not that one. Steel painted is the one I wanted. So anything with these includes randomness, because that randomness is going to allow you to drag a value such as this, which is going to increase the rust amount on your asset, which is also very useful. So you can see that slider over there increases the rust amount. So some of the normal materials have some really cool functions. If you take this one, for example, and I go and add another material, I can paint that blood as well. I don't know why I just added a folder. Okay, but let's quickly jump to the smart materials. Now, when it comes to smart materials, these are, as I mentioned before, basically it's materials that have already been configured with a bunch of masks and a bunch of different effects and things like that. I'll go through those in a moment. They're all over here. But a smart material is going to already give you some surface imperfections and things like that. So let's say, for example, we take this plastic glossy stained and we apply it on here. Notice how it already has some dirt and dust on it. And you can see that some of the dirt kind of gathers on the edges. If we take something different, maybe this plastic dusty, for example, if you throw that on there, that should work out the curvature and see now it's extra dusty on those curves. And you can even, for example, go to your dust over here, and I think you can flip it over. Um, in fact, you should be able to flip the whole um, mask. So if we go to the mask builder over here, when you open up a smart material, you get a mask builder. And in here, you get all of your different properties with all your different layers that have been fitted into this one folder. And some of those layers have masks, which would appear on the right-hand side of them, and then effects, which would appear underneath them. And it's usually on these effects where you want to go and play around with your settings. So if I go and remove my invert now, doesn't really make much of a difference. On some of the other smart materials, you'll clearly see a difference. And we also, if I can just go and quickly change my base color, that will also be very useful. Just make the base color something dark so we can see the dust. If I go to my mask builder over here, if I invert it, it doesn't really make much of a difference. I was hoping it does. It's fine. Then we can add or adjust the grunge over here. You can go and adjust the contrast of the dust, so you'll see that now it's much more spread out as opposed to this one. You can adjust the level, as I mentioned, which is going to adjust the level of the dust. So you can go through all of these settings and kind of play around and see like what looks best. But it's all of these tiny surface imperfections that make your model. Okay, and then the scratches, let's up those. But luckily we can still go and paint some scratches ourselves. Okay, so let me actually go and change this to that golden color, because I quite like the effect that it's giving. If we take that, we take our roughness down. And now metallic up. So it gives quite a nice effect over there. Now, let's say, for example, I wanted to go and apply some dust on here. I can go and create a new fill layer. Just watch out that it doesn't create it inside of your folder. So what I do usually to make sure it doesn't, I'll click on the layer below it and then open up a new fill layer. And then drag it to above here. Then I'm going to give this fill layer a roughness of 0, a metallic of 1. Actually, a roughness of 0 is a bit much, maybe around there, because I want like a metallicness to kind of shine through my gold. Now, obviously, we can't see the gold at the moment, but I'll show you guys how to activate that in a moment now. Over there. Okay, and then there's a couple of different ways to go about adding your scratches. First of all, we can go to the masks over here, and you can go and apply scratches. Say edges strong scratches. I can click and drag on that and apply it on my fill layer, and you'll notice that that now applied my scratches on my edges, on the curvature of my mesh, which is exactly what I wanted. And the cool thing is we can go and change this at any point. If we click on curvature and you go to global blur, you'll see that that basically just blurs it all out. If you go to global balance, it's going to give you more or less scratches. So obviously you can adjust that to a tiny amount. And then you can also adjust the contrast. So that's going to make it blend in a bit more, all the way to 0. And then all the way to 1 is a very sharp scratch. Now, I usually don't like putting it all the way on 0. It's a bit too much. I'll just pull it back down to about 0.3, because it gives you that nice sharp scratch over there, but it's not too much, because it kind of fades into the paint really well. And then let's say, for example, that I'm not done with this as yet. Don't worry if your curvature settings or your mask setting disappears. If you want it back, you can just click on the mask and it brings back your mask settings. Now, let's say, for example, that I want to add some dirt. I can go and add another fill layer. This one, let's make it an ugly brown, almost like that. I can take my roughness to 1, metallics on 0. I don't really need the height or the roughness. No, I do need roughness. Normal, I don't need. Opacity and emission, I don't need. Let's make it something like this. Now, another way to go and add an effect on this would be to go and add your black mask. So the difference between a black and a white mask is the fact that a black mask is going to not show your material until you paint on it. And a white mask, if you go here and say add white mask, now it's going to show only that material until you paint on it, and then it'll expose the material underneath it. So I usually like to make a black mask, because then I can go to my brushes, select a dirt splash brush, and now I can very easily just go and add some dirt splashes to this. And you can even go and change your roughness, your height on this if you really want to. So let's say that the dirt must be standing up a little bit. We can go there, and now the dirt will pop out of your mesh. Now, obviously, when it comes to things like this, especially on these type of layers, it's very important that you do not have your mirror applied, because surface imperfections are never symmetrical. So it's very, very important to keep that in mind. But let's say I don't want to go through the whole process of painting it myself. I can just go and remove that mask, go back to my masks over here, and then just say dust plastic perhaps over there. Okay, now we can see a tiny bit of dust. Maybe we should make it normal dust. It might be a bit much. Let's go to dust subtle. Actually, it looks like it stacks it. So let me just remove this again. We can maybe even add a dust surface on there. Okay, so this part is looking good. We can still go and paint in the part from the front of the gun when we get there. So I can click on my mask again, on my layer, sorry, and then I can remove all of that unnecessary junk that I don't want to see right now. And let's say, for example, I want to take 2 layers and add them in another folder. I can press Control G. That'll add it in another folder for me, and I can call this surface imperfections. Okay, so the plastic dirty is going to be the base color for this, and this is not plastic anymore. So to make that gold dusty. Okay, so my gold is pretty much done, and I can go to, let's say, for example, the bolts. If we hide everything, all of this should be able to just be a simple metal, except for that one over there needs to be a gold. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to show you guys a different way of painting. And the cool thing is we won't be physically painting. We're going to tell the software that we want a solid object, a full object, to be appearing on the black mask. So let's just quickly go back to our smart materials, or simply, yeah, I guess we can go smart materials. And I want to focus on getting something that'll work for these. Now, for all of these, it can be something like a damaged metal. Very often we can find steel rust, steel scratched, stained. So there's some really cool materials over here. In fact, I even think this painted rough could work very well. So I'm going to click and drag that over there, and it'll apply it to my whole model, or my whole object. Now, as per the adjustments I need to go and make, I can click on my metallic paint over here, and we definitely need to bring down some of these scratches. So I can drop the balance of that. Actually, the scratches are fine. These ones, let's see. Okay, with those two, it's mainly the edge scratches, those ones that I'm worried about, because they're a bit much. Okay, so we can just drop them down a little bit to about there. Now, as I mentioned before, when we take a look at our reference, we can see that this part here in the back, if we jump to Blender, is golden, right? So I know that I need to go and make that part golden. But I already have all of this painted. Now, let's say, for example, I don't want to go and manually paint this gold. I can go to this layer over here. I can add a fill layer on top. I can go to my materials over here and say, actually, let's do something else. I'm going to take my gold dusty over here because it's the same gold as as these parts. So I'm going to take this gold dusty texture, and I'll show you guys how to right click, copy layer, go to your bolts, close that one there, click on the full layer over here, right click and say paste layer. And that will now paste my gold dusty underneath my steel painted. So steel painted is still the one that shows up. Now, instead of going and manually painting on this, with a brush. So obviously if I go now, paint on that. I don't know why it's not painting. You just remove the mask. I can go and tell the software, let's not do that material. Just grab gold pure. Okay. I can tell the software where I want this material to appear. So if I put that on top, I can right click and say add black mask. And now on the right hand side, on the left hand side over here, you can see we have paint, eraser, projection, which I never really use, and then polygon fill, which we're going to do now. You also have smudge, clone tool, your material picker, and then this is substance share stuff, which is also really cool. And I think this one is Sketchfab. You can link your substance painter to Sketchfab so that if you click on your browser, it usually opens it up, and you can download a model from Sketchfab. Or it used to be like that. It seems like it's going through the Creative Cloud, which actually kind of makes sense. Anyway, so we're on this one over here. So I'm going to go to my material picker, and you'll see that it gives us the wireframe of our model now. And it changes this over here to polygon fill. Now there's a bunch of different options that we have over here. We can take the triangle, and what that's going to do, sorry, my Creative Cloud is really messing with my computer now. Okay. So with the triangle, it's going to basically take the half of each face and paint it in. With this one, it's going to take each face and paint it. And you can also click and drag, by the way. Just watch out when you do that, it takes the objects behind it as well, which is very, very annoying. Or you can go to this one, which selects individual objects to make that color. Or you can go to this one, and this will select a UV island. So let's say, for example, that this nut, this bolt here at the top was, it is a nut, was two separate objects, and I clicked on that, it would have taken only the metal piece, for example. But I'm going to select my object one there, and I'll paint that in. Now, obviously, if you have, let's say, for example, you have a black mask, you can go and make that that color back to 0 and bring that back at any point in time. Okay, so I'm actually going to try the same method now with my gold dusty. Let's see if that works. Add black mask. Yep. Take that one, select that, and now this golden piece at the back has exactly the same material as the previous pieces, these gold pieces over here. So once you're done, you can just go and click back on your brush, and that will make your wireframe disappear. Okay, so if I remember correctly from the reference, no, that is golden. Okay, never mind. So the next part would then be this metal over here. Now, before we continue, let's just quickly go through the rest of the stuff we didn't go through here. We've been to the smart masks. This is just a different way of like adding gradients or glow or whatever. So it's different post-processing type of things. You can also go to your brushes over there. This right here is your alphas, and I usually use them for the stencils. Then you get your normals. So if you want to add anything normal wise onto your objects, you can do that by using these. And then this is your HDRIs, which you can change, by the way, by holding shift and right clicking, and that will then rotate the HDRI so you can get different lighting on your model. Another cool thing about the software is that we can at any point in time swap between 3D and 2D. If I just click here at the top and I go to 3D and 2D, now I can see my UV island on this side, and I can see my 3D object on the other side, which is very useful. Okay, you can also go to only 2D or only 3D. You can open it up in new windows. So if you have two screens, you can put your one window on the one screen, which is very useful. And then over here, we can change from perspective to orthographic. And you can also change the way that you rotate. And you can then render it over here. Okay, so rendering will jump into iRay. We'll do that at a later stage. But obviously, we'd want to rather render inside of Blender. Okay, so for the metal parts, I'm just going to remove the gold and the bolts. Before I do that, I just want to show you something really cool. If I go back to my gold over here, and let's say, for example, I want the quality of this to be better, I can go to my texture set settings. I can scroll down to my size, and I can change this to 4K. And you'll see that it's going to load a little bit. There's the bar. It's going to load, and as soon as that's done, it's going to up the quality of my textures. And that's also why it's so cool for Unity and Unreal, any sort of game engine that we're using, is this is a way that we can generate LODs. If we generate different textures, the software is seamlessly going to adjust the detail for us, and we can go and export, 125, 256, 512. We can go through all of these and export whatever we need. In fact, I can change the quality of it here, and when I export, I can export it as a lower quality, so I don't have to look at the ugly low quality, which is pretty cool. So you can see the quality definitely changing. If we take it down to something like 512, you'll also see a very clear difference. Some of the details become obscure and hard to kind of see. So it's really cool that you can swap between your resolutions at any point in time. Okay, anyway, let's move on to the metal parts. So for this, it's almost like a purple type of metal. I also want to show you guys the particle brushes, and it seems like they included them in here. So as you can see, when you see this tiny little icon at the bottom of the brush, that usually means something. With the orange dots, it was dynamic. With the Photoshop icon, it means that it's a brush out of Photoshop. With these ones over here, it means that it includes randomness, which we noticed earlier. And then the one with the many dots is a particle brush. So if we go back to our gold, and this is actually a really cool way to show. If we go back to our gold, let's say, for example, I want to go and apply a layer on my gold that is going to be oil. I'm going to add a new empty layer. I'm going to post it above everything else. I'll look for the oil. The splat is a bit too much.
This might sound scuffed, but with the blood texture work, if you were to able to change the colors,
Yeah, it should be able to work. You mean like if I go and select a blood from here?
I saw earlier there was a blood.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yes, blood. I do think that it could potentially work. I mean, I haven't really tried it out yet. I'll give it a shot now, out of curiosity. But let's say, for example, I select my oil brush, the oil spill. I think I found it just now. There, oil leaks. If I go to my mesh and I paint on it now, it's going to create particles that's going to run down my mesh, which is going to simulate the oil leaks from the gun piece over here. And the cool thing is that it basically follows, it used to follow your UV maps, but now it follows the normals of your object. So if I push it over here, you'll see that it runs down pretty much exactly the way it should in real life. It doesn't follow my normals. So in the past, it used to like run across and dumb stuff like that. But yeah, you can go and add oil. You can go, for example, if we move this back up there, there's also a splat brush, which is gonna, if you have blood, you can splat it over the screen like that, and it'll also run down. So there's a bunch of different particle brushes like this. There's a sandstorm. I like the rain especially. So with the rain, for example, let's say for you have a character that is standing in the rain. You can go and add a new layer. You can change the um, desired materials. So I don't want color, I don't want height, I want roughness, and I don't want metallic. And I'm going to make this a 0 roughness, which means that it's going to be as shiny as it can be. And if I go over my model, it's going to rain onto my model. And now you can see how that rain affects my surface. So I really like to do that very often when I'm creating characters for cinematic renders when they're standing in the rain or whatever. If you bring them into Substance Painter and you just throw a rain layer over it, really, really helps. Another cool thing about many of these particles is you'll see that when I rain on my object, take a look at how they kind of dam up at certain areas, the same way that the water would actually run across the model. So it's extremely useful to use your particle brushes. Let's see if there's any others that I can show you. The broken glass one is quite cool. If you have a piece of glass in your model, you can just click on. No, it took the rain there. So it just kind of shatters the glass. So obviously this time around we wouldn't need roughness, we need height and normal. And then we want to cut into the mesh. So we'll do that. So there's some really interesting things that you can play around with when it comes to the brushes. It's probably the most important thing when it in Substance for me. Let's say, for example, you wanted to burn your object. Go over there, click on the burn. And that's just going to add like a black smoke or a black like smear onto your objects as well. But obviously you have to be quite close to your objects. Another thing is you can go and adjust the properties of the brush as well, which is quite cool. Anyway, I can delete this. Does anybody have any questions? By the way, I feel like I'm rambling a lot.
Actually, I do have a question here for that, like the burn brush and everything. If you were to like maybe make an object like let's say a rope and you burn it with the texture and everything, would you
Yeah.
have to make like 100 different textures, or is there a way to make it so that the texture changes dynamically for an animation, for example?
That is a very good question. I've never attempted to export the animation of the particle system. I also don't really, I can't think of a way that how that would work, or like how to even start doing that. So that's something that I would definitely like to look into. So thanks for asking me that one, because it is actually a very valid question. And I mean, you need to be able to do that if you think about it, because um, all of these games that we play that use Substance Painter, very often you'll see that some of those textures or whatever are animated as well, which is really, really cool.
Mm. So you can import the substance materials into an engine that has access to the parameters. So if the material was designed in Substance Designer to add, let's say, moisture or add dirt in a way that makes it dynamic, you can tap into those properties. But what I think would probably be the easiest from an animation perspective is just to export one without burn marks on it and the other one with burn marks, and then use something like dynamic paint in Blender to mask the two materials over time.
Yeah, that would make sense. I was thinking of the whole dynamic paint thing as well. I just had no idea how you would kind of demonstrate that. But I think, like you said, if you do a um, one with it and one without it, can be quite beneficial. You should be able to like switch between the two.
Yeah, dynamic paint's super fun. It's like, so for rain, for instance, you would do one material that has no specular, and then you could do that particle effect with the rain, or you could just export an additional um, channel with like specular blotches on it, and the dynamic paint basically saves out a sequence of images as a mask. So you can save it to file. You can cache that all into an image sequence, and then you can use that as the mask in your shader to reveal the specular underneath the other layer. Um, so yeah, for making things burn, for making things wet, um, or appear wet, splatters, footsteps, anything that sort of needs to stick or stay behind. Dynamic paint's quite cool for that.
Mm.
They often use it for oceans to do the wake in water,
Y-
because there where the boat goes, you'll have a bit of a trail, and in um, Blender automatically it has like a I think it's called wetness or something like that. But it fades over time as well, so it's really clever. It's very well designed.
Yeah, I've used it quite a lot for like raindrops and stuff. You can make a particle system, a brush and a plane at the bottom, like a canvas. And then when you adjust the brush settings to make the particles affect the canvas, then it can also create some tiny ripples and stuff. That is very, very cool. Yeah, at some point I also want to show you guys the stencil brush. I'll get to that in a moment. While we still have time. And then I also want to quickly transport it back to Blender just to showcase that as well. Okay, so now for this, I just want to go and change the roughness of. Go and remove that. We can perhaps add some color if you really want to, but I don't really want to add too much color to this. So I'll probably drop the opacity of it. And then I'm going to just go to my brush and apply some dirt spots on it as well. Not spots. Splash is also not what I'm looking for. Take this one. Okay, so I'm just going to go through and basically break the roughness of this item, just so that it doesn't look so manufactured and perfect. So you just go through, you change the color a little bit, you change the roughness a little bit, and we paint some spots on here. Something like that. And then this will obviously be the perfect time to go and apply a smart mask. So I'll probably put this one above everything. And then let's apply iron to that. Maybe not that one. Let's take a normal grainy. Okay, then I'm going to right click and say add a black mask. And then I can go to my masks over here and let's just see what we're going to choose. I think there's strong edges scratch. I quite like that one. But obviously we just need to quickly go and change this a little bit. So global balance, we can make that a little bit less. And then I want to up the contrast. Sorry, I want to bring it down a bit. About there. Bring the balance down a bit more. Okay, so as you can see, it just adds some really nice scratches on the barrel and on this piece over here, which, by the way, I think is golden at the bottom. So this is a really nice spot again for us to go and copy our gold. So gold dusty, copy layer, go to the metal, select the top one, right click and say paste, and then right click black mask. And I want to go over there, select the object, and then select this bottom piece. Okay, I'm not 100% sure why it's doing that. I think that's got to do with the baking that we did. Okay, but there, that piece is now also golden, same as the rest. Okay, now let's say, for example, that there's something I want to put on the side of this. I also know that there's something in the front here. So maybe we should quickly showcase that. Metal, purple, there we go. If we jump in here, there's those two crosses and like a tiny nostril almost on the front of this. Now, if I'm not mistaken, yes, Alt-Shift click is going to help you rotate into a view. Or in increments. Okay, but there is a way to just go into front view. For now, I'm just going to do this manually. So I'll go over there. On my gold, you need to make sure that you're painting on the right layer or the right texture set. So on my gold over here, I'm going to go and add a new layer. On this layer, I don't want height, color, or roughness or metallic. I only want the heightness and the normal. I can also go and remove that. So that will then reset everything, which is a bit frustrating, but it's fine. The height and the normal. Now I'll take my height down into the minus, and we can go and apply a stencil onto this. So to do that, I'll go to my alphas, which is... Just wait for that autosave. It's not that one. Here it is. Okay, so I know that it's like a cross type of shape. So let me just quickly go through and look for something similar. It's fine. Let's just take any random one. I'll also apply my mirror now, because remember, if we take a look at the reference, they are... Okay, no, they're not 100% mirrored, so it's fine. Then I'll scroll until I can see my stencil little function here. I'm going to click on my alpha and drag it to my stencil, and now I can see my stencil in the viewport. Now, there's some ways to change how your stencil appears and whatnot. That's some of the other settings that you have to go through. I'm not going to jump into that, but the thing that I want to mention is that if I hold S, that's going to now control my stencil. So you can see there, S plus middle mouse is pan, S plus left mouse is rotate, Shift plus S and left mouse is snap stencil to a rotational point, and then right is going to zoom. So I'm going to constantly release my S, then press it and click until I'm happy with the location of my stencil. One thing that's very, very important to note, though, is that your stencil is not going to change location when you change the location of your 3D viewport. That's something that's very important to remember. Okay, so we'll take the stencil. Let's maybe make it -3 or -0.3. No, wrong way around. Take it this way. And you'll see now that it carves into my object. Then I'll press S, I'll go to this side, I'll rotate it a little bit this way, maybe make it a bit smaller, then I'll paint that in as well. then I can just very easily go and click on this to remove that. And now we just need something that's going to represent those nostrils. So something like this. And obviously, the lower the quality of your, or the lower the resolution of your um, textures, the less you're going to see when you're doing something like this. Okay, but there we have that carved in. Wrong one. Okay, we can also see that it's a little bit darker. So let me see if I can adjust that with a filter. If I go over here, you can see you can add a generator, which is just a mask. You can add paint, add fill, add levels, add a filter, or add an anchor point. So let me see if I can try with a filter, and then let's look for, not a gradient. That's height blend. I'm just looking for like a hue and saturation, basically. Okay, so filter is not going to work. Let's see, maybe, yeah, filter is not going to work. So if we go to the levels, this is the levels of the base color. You can change the levels of anything you want. And let's see, I'm not sure if this is really even going to change anything, to be honest. Doesn't really look like it's doing much. It's also not really doing anything. It's going to want me to paint that in now. Yeah. Okay. So it seems like you'll just have to kind of go over and paint. If you forgot to paint on a certain layer, you'll just manually have to go and paint on it. So I'll then remove the height and the normal, go to my color and make it something darker, maybe something like that. We can add roughness and metallic. Needs to be metallic. The roughness can be a bit less. And then we can just kind of go and paint into those cracks there. And more often than not, I'll use a textured brush like I have now when I'm painting, because it just adds a little bit more story to your object.
Sorry, Theunis.
Yeah.
With the stencils, I know that in Blender I've used Photoshop Alpha as a stencil before. Can you do the same in Substance?
Yes. Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very integrated, very well integrated with Photoshop and Illustrator. Maybe not as much Illustrator, but definitely Photoshop. And see, now this is where I would usually start going in and doing some hand painted stuff. So, for example, just adding a little bit of extra dirt there underneath that part there. But it's also very important to remember that stuff like this needs to generally, I'm doing it wrong now, it needs to generally be on its own layer. Because if you want to trigger it and play around with it, then you need to be able to do that without really losing anything of your original um, layers. So it's very non-destructive if you do it in a smart way. So you don't necessarily always have to go for just a realistic look or something like that. Even if you have PBR, you can still go and hand paint some stuff onto your textures, and it's just going to make the whole thing kind of pop and look a little bit more unique. The color of this is becoming a bit much, so luckily those sliders that we have there on the side can just decrease that a little bit. I'll show you in a moment. Let's just increase the size here a bit more. Okay, so let's say, for example, I'm not too happy with the color of this. It's a bit too much for me. I can just go over there like I did earlier and drop that color a little bit. And then the roughness, want to see if I take that away completely, it dulls it out, which is exactly what I wanted on those spots. Okay, great. So we're pretty much done with all of the parts. This purple paint's not completely done yet. Let me see if I can just quickly copy the metals texture over here. If I'm not mistaken, you should be able to convert something to a smart mask. Or you can just Control G to group all of this together, and then you should be able to just copy this whole layer and go to the purple paint and paste it over here. Okay, and then obviously I want to remove that steel, so that'll bring my original color back. Let's go to this layer. This was the dirt I manually painted in, so I can remove that. I quite like that one, actually, so I'm going to leave it in there. Why don't you want to come back on? It's a bit odd. Anyway, so let's say, for example, that I like this texture, but I want it to be a bit bigger. I can go to my UV transformation. It should actually be this one. Does this have UV transformation? No. Okay, you can change your UVs when you do have something that takes UVs. You can change it over here, by the way. It just makes your scratches a little bit, or the grain in this case, a little bit bigger or smaller. Okay, maybe this is a good place for me to show the eraser. If I take my eraser and I go to a brush and let's say, I quite like that watercolor one we have over here. So now it's just going to basically erase the dirt that I have painted, and you'll see that it erases it in the shape of that brush that we have selected. Okay, so it just gives it like a nice texture. And then I quickly want to show you something else as well with the stencils. Let's say, for example, we go and create a new layer over here. Go back to our brushes. We change this color, height, normal, opacity. Actually, let's leave emission on. For the base color, I'm going to make it black. For the height, I'll make it dip in. For the roughness, it can be quite shiny. And for the metallic, I'll leave it on 0. And then for the emission color, I'll change that in a moment. Then let's quickly go and select a mask or a stencil. And I'm looking for specific like wording. Because I want to show you how the emission works inside of Blender as well when we pull it over. So let's take this warning one. I'm going to click that. Oh, by the way, if I just click on warning once, it's going to change my brush into warning, which is quite interesting. But I don't want to do that. So I'll drag it into my stencil over there. Then I also just want to quickly go and bring my brush back to something normal. Take this one. Okay. Just scale that up a bit, flip it around, go a bit closer. Let me just see what this height is going to do. It's going to bring it out. That's not what I want. I want it to go in. And I need to remember to bring in my emission. So I'm going to give it like a nice yellow, orangey yellow type of light. Okay, then I'm just going to go over this and paint it in there. Now, it doesn't really look like much, but when we pull it into Blender with especially Eevee and Bloom, it looks actually really, really nice. Okay, so we now have everything painted, or let's say we do for the most part. I think everything is pretty much painted. I would have liked to add some more details over here, but I see we only have 20 minutes or so left. Okay, so I'm just going to save this project. Yeah.
Theunis, can I just ask that you adjust the gold? It looks like fake gold.
Okay, no problem.
I suspect if you make it a bit lighter and a bit closer to orange, it should look like that alloy gold type.
Yeah. Okay, let me see what I can do. Around there, perhaps. Not really. Maybe a bit more. Okay, something like that. Which would then obviously mean I need to quickly go and adjust it on this one as well. Okay. Is it better?
I think it looks good.
Cool. Okay, so now that we're done with the textures, it's just important that we save this. Then I'm going to go to File and say Export Textures. By the way, if you're doing a model paint that you already found within Substance, because they do have some 3D models you can paint on, then you can actually export that mesh as well, which is pretty cool. But anyways, now over here for the first set of settings, it's the global settings telling us what layers we want to export or what materials we want to export. So in this case, obviously I want to export all of them. And then also, do you want it PNG? We can even make it EXR, I believe. I'm pretty sure I saw that somewhere. You can change it into a PSD, which is quite cool. But for now, I'm just going to leave it on the normal PNG. I usually like making mine 16-bit. The output template can stay the same, and then the output directory is then where you're going to be saving your textures. So I'll just quickly create a new folder, call that textures, and then select that folder. Then under here, the output templates, don't worry about any of these except the one you're busy using. So that's this one for us. And you can see that it brings out your base color, roughness, metallic, normal, your color space, and your emission, because emission is the only one that we really added. We never did anything with opacity. And then on here, your list of exports, it tells you that it's going to, underneath Bolt, it's going to export the base color, emission, height, metallic, normal, and roughness. You just need to go and make sure that that's the same for all of them. So everything should be set up and ready. If you're exporting to Unreal, you can see that they already have some Unreal stuff there. Also Unity. So it's really cool. You can just click on that and it'll automatically export to the right naming conventions. Just as an example, if I go to Unity HD Render, you'll see that it takes my roughness and it replaces it with a specular, which is quite cool. So it automatically gives you everything that you want. So if I go to my settings again, then I can just say save settings, go back there. It's quite annoying that it throws it out. And then I can just go and click on export. That will then run through, and once this is done, you know that your textures have been exported and we can import them into Blender. Okay, so you'll see that it says here successfully exported, and there's all of the different textures, so it's done. So I can then, let's just quickly save this again, and I can jump into my Blender, hide my reference, and bring out my object. Then I'm going to select one of these. We can go into the Shadings tab, and we can go onto our material itself. Now, for those of you who don't know the shortcuts, and I'm pretty sure most of you do, but if you have your node wrangler enabled and you select your principled BSDF node and you press Control Shift T, that'll then open up a principled texture setup, which means that I only have to go and select all of the maps, and it'll manually automatically apply all of those maps onto the correct locations. So I know now that I want purple paint, right? So I'm going to go to purple paint, and I'll select all of the textures underneath purple paint, and I'll then click on principled texture setup. And that will throw my base color into my base color, my metallic into metallic. Let's just give it a second. My roughness into roughness, normal into normal. It manually, it automatically decides on a displacement, which it tries to use the, if I'm not mistaken, the height. So I don't ever want that displacement, obviously. I just delete that. And then you can see even the emission has been plugged into the correct location. You know, color into the emission over there. Not only that, all of these have been, the color spaces of them have been correctly configured. So this one's sRGB, that one's non-color, this one's non-color. So all of the stuff has really been done for you if you use that method. Okay. And then just one thing that I wanted to show you guys as well. Let me quickly just go and okay, those are all enabled already. So I can go to my emission strength and punch that up, and that will create some really cool effects. So you can animate your emission then, obviously, as well. Like that. Okay, anyway, let's go back and do that same thing for the rest of the textures. So this one over here is gold, Control Shift T, and I'll select the first gold texture, the last one, and principal texture. And it's a good measure to just go through and make sure that everything is in the right places, because every now and then it freaks out a little bit and it plugs the metallic into the specular, for example, or it tries to add an emission when there is none. Same with the displacement. And another cool thing about this method is it also automatically gives you the mapping node in case you want to go and adjust your mapping, which is also really, really cool. Okay, so the gold is done, the purple paint is done. So now the metal, let's Control Shift T and go and select all of the metal parts over there. I'll immediately go and just quickly delete the emission and the displacement. And then finally our bolts. Click on Principled, Control Shift T, go to the bolts all the way through. And then once again, just displacement and emission. Okay, and then probably the most important out of this whole process, file, external data, automatically pack resources. Because then all of these images will automatically be packed into your blend file and you don't have to worry about ever losing them. I can go and delete them from my computer now and they'll still be in my file. Okay, so there we go. That's kind of the whole process that I usually take. Substance has a lot more things to offer, and a lot of those are quite advanced and would take a lot more time to kind of dive into. If any of you want to have some extra feedback or like extra lessons on Substance, also please feel free to pop me a message on Discord. I'll be more than willing to help out or give you feedback or just quickly help you sort out an issue. Okay, does anybody have any questions?
Silly old question, but I see we have a lot of texture maps at the end of this process. Is there a way to bring it all together to lessen the amount, or is it better to keep the amount of texture images, sorry, the same?
In my opinion, I think the only way that you would really effectively be able to bring down the amount of maps it uses is by unwrapping everything at the same time so that it's on the same UV island and giving everything the same material. But then you're going to have to do vertex paint because it's quite cool if you do vertex paint on a certain color data of your object. It's almost like it creates the ID map of it. So when you go into Blender, into Substance, you can paint let's say for example the front part of the barrel is red and that part is green, but the whole thing has one material. Substance has this cool way where you can say everything that's red needs to be wood, everything that is blue needs to be metal, and so it's a completely different workflow, but you would have to go and bake or unwrap everything on the same island, paint those vertex paints, import it into Substance, and then export all of it as one material. So then the least amount that you'll get away with is like five texture maps more or less, which show base color, your roughness, your metallic, your normal, and then obviously emission if you have it.
Would you recommend this method, or should we rather stick with the current one where we have the different objects separated?
I definitely think that that's depending on the reason behind your model. So
Yeah,
are you
the
planning on
output.
using it? Yes. Yeah. Are
Yeah,
you planning on?
because for games you want less materials, but for animation it's not really going to matter that much. It's like a very small impact on your maybe loading of your pre-render or something like that. It's not going to have a significant impact. But for
Cool.
games, you want to consolidate your materials and your UVs and have them all at one, and have one texture atlas to rule them all.
Excuse me. Just have a
Yeah.
question. Wouldn't cramming all your UVs into one island like pixelate your textures too much?
But see that now it's much more forgiving for something like an 8K texture, for example. Because then, even though everything is on the same UV island, if you give it an 8K texture, um, it kind of makes up for that. And the software or the game engine will then much rather be able to handle one single 8K texture as opposed to 20 4K textures or 2K textures. So in that sense, when you do put it all on the same UV island, I personally would have gone and just made it like an 8K or a 4K texture. And
Yeah,
I definitely, yeah,
sorry,
Makes sense.
8K sounds like crazy talk, but 4K is totally doable.
yeah, definitely.
Also,
Yeah.
just pack your UVs better. Don't unwrap like an animator and unwrap like a game student, and you'll get a lot more resolution out of it.
Yeah,
Like if we
definitely.
just look at one of your unwraps, I know you did it really quickly, but there's a lot of space that you could like use up a lot better if you think about it. Because if you that one's actually not a bad one. But yeah, like all those circles, you could cut them in half or cut them in quarters and then pack them a lot tighter, so you're not losing all that like pixels in the middle of those circles. So that's something you could do, and then you can pack things a lot closer and a lot neater because we're not working in Photoshop like back in the day. So the 3D painting software will be able to go over those scenes. So
Yeah,
that's what I would do.
yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree. I definitely think UVs is going to be one of the most important parts of your painting process because if you didn't unwrap correctly, and like Paolo said, you're wasting all of that UV space. then you're going to get away with a lot less detail than you potentially can. And a very good example of this is if you were to unwrap a character, for example. Very often when you unwrap the character's face, you'll see that their eyes and their nose and their mouth are quite squashed in the center. And because they're so much smaller on the UV island, the texture quality is going to be much worse on there. And so let's say, for example, you were to go and put a skin texture inside of Substance that has skin pores in the normal map, you'll see these big craters on the person's nose, but like small skin details on the forehead. So unwrapping is for sure one of the most important parts of getting proper textures. And
that's
yeah,
yeah. Common pitfall with unwrapping a face is that you do a seam at the back of the head, and then the skull and everything that's actually supposed to be under the hair takes up the majority of the UV space, and the face is kind of like shrunken down to a little um, pinch.
mhm.
So yeah, just by um, creating smarter seams and prioritizing certain elements. So always consider where the camera is and which part of your model is going to feature, and then prioritize those UVs.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
So I kind of liked Substance's edge detection to a certain extent. But let's say, for instance, that the barrel and the end of the barrels on this gun were supposed to be completely round.
Mhm.
Because of the edge detection, you can see they are not round in a sense. You can
Okay.
see the edges that were there. Is there a way to make Substance reference the high quality model to make it look like circular within the textures instead of having the edge detection detect the actual mesh?
Yeah, see, the problem that I made there, the mistake I made personally there, and this comes again with a rushed model, is if you take a look at my normals, they've got auto smooth on it. And that auto smooth creates the illusion that there's obviously a line there because it's going to smooth everything that's below above 30 degrees, I believe, not below. So the auto smooth is the reason why it's doing that. And I needed the auto smooth for the other things. If you have more time or prepare your model better, then you wouldn't have auto smooth on these three barrels, and then the edge detection wouldn't pick up on it at all. So, for example, when you take a look at these golden parts, right, they're also circular, same way that the other objects is circular, but they don't have that edge detection over there. Granted, it's because they have more geometry, so there's less of a bend, because they also do have auto smooth enabled. But all I'm trying to say is, if you have, I think these have the same amount of vertices as these, and with these you can see it a lot less, um, because they don't have auto smooth on. Same goes for the handle over here. You see, it didn't create those lines over the handle because I didn't have my auto smooth enabled
Yeah, it's a
as
smoothing
opposed to there.
performance.
Yeah.
You can
Also,
fake it. You can tell a plane that it should be smooth, and the 3D software is going to do its best
Yeah.
trying to look like a curve.
But I can even go in here, for example, Franco, if you're really not like up for it, and you can just go and quickly change your color to, I would recommend going close to what you want. And then you can just go and, kind of manually fix those imperfections if you really wanted to. Granted, you might lose some of your detail because you're now painting with I don't really
Great.
want to say primitive.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very important that you prepare your model beforehand and that you take care of all of these things before you actually go into substance. Your model, you need to know that your model is pretty much perfect and finished before you go do your textures, because otherwise you're going to be stuck with stuff like this.
Yeah, I've never managed to like have it a one-way route. There's always like export, work a little bit in Substance, and then realize, oh shoot, I missed this part, or I did this, or that UV is not sufficient, and then go back, fix it up, and come back in again.
Mm.
It's hardly ever just smooth. But like with everything in 3D, really, it's like when you think you're done, and then
Yeah,
get a curveball.
definitely.
I just wanted to quickly ask, what is the why do we have I've always wondered about the low poly and the high poly thing in Substance. I think I've been going about it wrong. What is the difference between painting it low poly while having it high poly?
Okay, so what you want to do is you want to use your low poly as the object that you're going to bake onto, and the high poly is going to be the object that you bake from. And what that is basically going to do is it's going to put the high poly mesh over the low poly mesh, and it'll bake the normals accordingly so that the low poly mesh looks like the high poly mesh. And we do that for gaming engines to optimize the gaming engine, make sure that it actually can run with the amount of geometry. If you have a high poly mesh that you import into a gaming engine, it's not going to perform great. So it's important for us to kind of bake the normals of the high poly onto the low poly. And then after that, once you've baked it, the high poly mesh becomes pretty much null and void. Besides for cinematic renders, if you want to do like a cinematic of the character or whatever the case might be. But as soon as you've baked the normal maps and or any of the maps onto the low poly, the high poly, you're not going to use it again. And in Substance, there's no way of painting on it. You're only painting on the low poly unless you import the high poly as your original object. Does that make sense?
I think so. So you would, so if let's say you had two versions of this machine gun, you'd have a high poly and a low poly. You'd export the high poly, and in Substance, you'd reference it as a high poly, export it as a low poly.
Okay, so let me quickly see if I can showcase something. I'll go and add a subdiv on all of my objects. It's not going to be a pretty export.
If you want, I can show something on my end.
Yeah,
Show
okay.
high poly, low poly. If that way you don't have to like do too much. So this is what we're doing in the second year, and just to kind of show you how this works. So hopefully everyone's watching. Hopefully. Okay, so like normally as a game artist we do this would be my low poly. So and then we have the high poly models where you get to go balls to the wall and just go like all the creases and the skull and all of that kind of information. So you would export both of these models. You'd export the low poly and the high poly. And then you would go into Substance and you would go and say, when you go and bake your meshes, like here, you'll see that I've got referenced that high poly book. And then all it does is, like you saw with Theunis before, is we bake all the information, and then all that information becomes detail that we can work with. Like the skull wasn't in the low poly, but because of the high detailed model, I now have access to this kind of skull. But if you look sideways, there's zero information there. There's nothing there. It's just all kind of been faked. It's all trickery, really, black magic, if you will. And same thing with this little bookmark. There weren't any creases in the low poly. If we look at that, there's nothing there. So that's the reason you would use the high poly, low poly workflow, so that you can sculpt till your heart's content and then bring it into Substance and work with a manageable model at the end of the day. Okay, yeah, that's it.
That's actually
Um,
that's
while we're
actually
in
brilliant.
Substance,
Yeah,
sorry, while we're in Substance, I noticed a light source. Is there like a way that we can change the direction?
yes. If Tennis can just tell me what the shortcut
Yeah,
key is to move
it's
the light.
just
There we go. Hold
just
on.
right click.
Shift right click.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then it's got an HDRI in here that lights this object. So, like, unless you want to render from Substance, I never really look at the light source. Most of the time when I'm texturing, I just kind of do the base color without any lighting information to kind of see what's what. Because the lighting can be very tricky because like this lighting versus Blenders versus Unity or Unreal, completely different lighting setup. So you just want to use as much of a neutral skybox as you can when you're in Substance because you really don't want to be like it's going to lie to you if there's like orange in the light or blue in the light, then it'll affect your texture lighting, like the way you're texturing the asset at the end of the day. Yeah. That's it. Any other questions? And I'll leave it over to hand it over to Theunis.
Just quickly, I'm just making sure I got it right. For when you import, so you send both of them to Substance.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
you
we
im-
do. Well,
when you
let's create a new project. Let's do it again. So I'll go create a new one. Then I'll select the low poly. So over here, let me just quickly find this. My God. It's not it. Oh wait, I don't have the FBXs. What am I doing? I need to actually export them out. So let's do that quickly. So I'll just export this as an FBX, just pop it on the desktop. And then I already have presets for when I'm exporting just models, like selected mesh, all that stuff. And then that's done. Then we select the high res. Let's export that.
So you guys can see the red, green, and blue that Paolo painted there. That's the vertex colors that you're going to be using as your ID map a little bit later.
Mhm. We go, and I'm so glad I renamed my files because it's still called Spielbook, right? Yeah, it's not Spellbook, it's Spielbook. Okay, so don't click on Blender when it's exporting a high-res model. It hates me so much every time I do this, so I just have to be patient and let it export.
So it's just my machine that had a heart attack when I was
No, no, Blender, like as it's doing something, don't try to interact with it because then it might crash Blender. Or that goes for any software. So now that I've got it, I can go and import my low poly. There we go. And then we just click OK, discard. Oh, Jesus, my UVs. Please come back to Theunis's UVs again. Give me a second. Let me get the real fixed one. I feel like I'm doing this all over again. Sorry to mess with your time, everyone. Give me. There we go. Download and no, I didn't do this in the first place. Okay, so let's open that again. So you just go Control N like any other software to create a new file. I'm gonna open up the low poly. Click OK, and then don't save. We should just have the original book, so that's what it looks like. And then we want to bake that stuff. So I go old school. I don't have any fancy black magic like Theunis there. So now that I'm here, I can choose whatever resolution I want. And then I'm going to go and open the high poly from this little page icon here. And now it's going to use this high poly instead of using, remember, you can use low poly mesh. Doesn't mean it's low poly. It's just what Substance is understanding is that there's two versions of your model. So low poly doesn't mean it needs to be a game ready model. It's just the lower resolution of the two models. Even animation, you can't animate a character that's got 3 million polygons. You're never going to be able to animate that thing properly. So now that I've got the high poly here, I know I need to tweak this because the inside and outside raycasting, I think 0.25 on both should be good. So these values are not set in stone. They differ on the scaling of your model. So we're just gonna bake that. Now we wait patiently. There we go. There's lots of ways to bake your textures. You can bake them in Blender, you can bake them in Marmoset, you can bake them in something called XNormal. There's a lot of different softwares that allow you to bake from high to low. I just prefer to use it in the software that I'm doing it in, but it doesn't always give me the desired result. And there we go. So I use the high poly. So the high poly isn't in this like inside of my file folder at all. I mean, like inside of my substance file. It was just used as a reference to calculate all the information that I need. And then I'm good to go here. And if we just choose one of the substance smart materials, let's just pick one of these. And this is where the IDs that we were talking about earlier on. If you hold down Control and left click and drag, why don't these have IDs? What is happening here?
You can bake your mesh maps.
Oh, did I not bake ID maps? Let's check. Oh, yeah, ID, when you're using this, don't use material, use vertex. Let's do that again. And then it will bake the vertex colors. It's just one extra step, but you can also pick those UV shells afterwards using a selection filter, which will allow you to select either by color or by like the actual islands in your UV map. But yeah, let's just do that again so I can actually show what I was trying to do. So if I hold down Control and drag it, you'll see I have options of where I want to drag this. I can drag it onto the green one and just release. It'll only add to that green section. Then I can do the other ones, just drag it on there. And you'll see that because of they've all been color coded, each of these will have their own different material assigned to it. Hopefully that clarifies the high poly, low poly thing.
I've been using this program for like 2 years. I could have saved so much disk space.
Sorry, Paulo.
Yeah.
After exporting the textures, so you reference the high poly mesh in Substance for the low poly mesh.
Mhm.
If you made those textures, then you finished everything and you exported it, and you put those textures on the low poly mesh, would it then look like the high poly mesh?
Exactly. So what you saw in
Okay.
Substance is what it will look like inside of whatever the other programs are. They might just differ in like the settings for the normal maps and all that, but what you see in Substance is at least 8 out of 10 times what you'll get in the other software that you're using.
Okay, thank you.
I think the one key thing to remember there is that your high poly mesh doesn't need any UVs.
Yeah, that's the great fun part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get to be creative in your high poly, and then your low poly is the one that you use to for animation, for texturing, all that.
Only that needs UVs.
Yeah.
Lekker. Thank you very much, everyone. Theunis and Paulo and everyone that pitched in and asked questions.
Oh, anytime. It was fun.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I quickly ask a question? If someone has like a circle close, can you quickly show how you'd game ready the circle for UVs? Because I'm pretty sure it's like the reference that Theunis used where he has like a stamp on it. Wouldn't it be a stamp added to all of the UVs? To the circle UVs?
No,
Your
because the
If
UVs are
they're
flat.
if
Oh,
they're
sorry.
overlapping with each other, then
Yeah.
yes, then it's going to be on all
Yeah.
of them.
Okay. So it would
So
just
in a
remember that.
case like that, you have to just take that one specific UV. Because remember, you have that sync button in the top of Blender, top left corner in your UV
Yeah.
editor. So you can just sync it. You can make all of your cylinders or all of your circles kind of appear on each other. And then you just select the face that's going to have that protrusion or that cut in it and move it to another part of your UV island. You won't have that problem.
I guess it's not the like case of just doing it basically correctly and then noticing, okay, you have to change some stuff, go back to Blender, then you have to re-import it, right? The same
Yeah.
way. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know of a sync to Substance option.
No, that would be great, but no, there isn't any. But it's not rocket science, really. It's easy to kind of take these models across.
Yeah. Cool.
Wasn't there an add-on added last year?
There might be
There's
a paid one.
I think that was made. I think Substance and Blender made an add-on to directly take textures straight
Yeah.
from Substance.
Oh yeah,
to-
from Substance to Blender, yes. Not the other one, but it's a different thing altogether. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not painted textures, it's existing Substance textures. So it's SBAR files, which is Substance's native texture format. So it's smart materials in Blender, basically. But yeah, the different thing altogether. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day and good weekend.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thanks
much
for
for
the
Thanks a lot. That was